Full the Young and the Restless spoilers. There in the executive suite of Spectra, Charles was so brittle it felt as if a single wrong word might shatter the glass walls. Outside, the Genoa city skyline was gray and weeping rain, a fitting backdrop for the storm brewing inside. Audra Charles stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, her reflection ghosting over the wet concrete below. She wasn't looking at the view. Her gaze was fixed on the reflection of the conference room behind her, where Billy Abbott and Sally Spectra were huddled over a sprawling schematic of the Phoenix platform, the massive cross-platform media initiative that was supposed to put their newly rebranded company on the map. They were close. Too close. Billy said something, gesturing animatedly with a marker, and Sally threw her head back, laughing. It was a genuine, throaty sound that grated on Audra's nerves like sandpaper. Just days ago, she had warned Sally that Billy was a liability, a man who would always prioritize his family's legacy over her. She had thought the farewell dinner would be the end of it. Instead, it seemed to have evolved into a professional partnership that looked suspiciously like a romance rekindled under the guise of work. Audra. She turned, her face instantly composing into a mask of cool, corporate efficiency. Sally was waving her over. We need your eyes on the engagement metrics for the soft launch. Billy thinks we should push the beta test to Friday, but I'm worried about the server load. Audra walked over, her heels clicking a sharp, predatory rhythm on the hardwood. Friday is ambitious, she said, her voice smooth as silk. She leaned in, placing a hand on the table, effectively cutting the physical space between Billy and Sally. But if Billy is confident the infrastructure can handle it, who am I to disagree? He's the Abbott with the golden touch, isn't that right? Billy narrowed his eyes slightly, sensing the barb but ignoring it. It's not about a golden touch, Audra. It's about momentum. The market is hungry. If we wait, Newman Media might scoop our angle. Then we push, Audra said, a small, tight smile playing on her lips. I'll coordinate with the IT team to ensure the bandwidth is allocated. And I'll make sure it isn't, she added silently. The launch of the Phoenix platform was meant to be Spectra Charles's coronation. Instead, 3 days later, it was becoming a public execution. The war room, a repurposed office filled with monitors and empty coffee cups, was chaotic. Red error messages scrolled down the main dashboard like blood from a wound. What do you mean the encryption keys are invalid? Billy barked into his phone, his tie loosened, hair disheveled. We tested this 3 times. Sally was pacing the length of the room, her tablet clutched to her chest. I have 3 major advertisers on hold, Billy. They're saying the ad buy portal is redirecting them to a 400 for error page. A 400 for, it looks amateur. It's not amateur, it's a glitch, Billy snapped, slamming the phone down. And it's one that shouldn't be happening. Audra watched them from the doorway, a paper cup of herbal tea in her hand. She took a slow sip, hiding the satisfaction curling in her gut. It had been frighteningly easy. A few misplaced lines of code in the load balancer. A subtle modification to the user authentication protocol, changes she had made late last night using an admin login she'd borrowed from a junior developer. It's strange, Audra said, stepping into the fray. Her voice was the only calm thing in the room. The tech team is saying the protocols were altered manually, almost as if someone bypassed the safety checks to rush the launch. She let the implication hang in the air, heavy and poisonous. Sally stopped pacing. She looked at Billy. You overrode the safety checks. I did not, Billy said, defensiveness instantly raising his hackles. I authorized a bandwidth increase. That's it. Well, someone changed the protocols, Audra said, walking over to the main monitor and pointing a manicured finger at a line of log data. Right here, the timestamp is 2:00 a.m. Billy, weren't you logged in remotely then? You mentioned you couldn't sleep. Billy stared at the screen. I was reviewing the copy. I didn't touch the back end. It's your admin signature, Audra said gently, with a look of sympathetic concern that was pure theater. Maybe in the rush, you clicked the wrong configuration. It happens. We're all under pressure. Sally's eyes darkened. The trust that had been slowly rebuilding between her and Billy, the fragile bridge they were constructing over the chasm of their past, suddenly groaned under the weight. Billy, Sally said, her voice low, did you try to tweak the system without telling me? Because if you did, and you broke it. I didn't. Billy insisted, but he looked at the log, and the doubt in his own eyes was visible. He had been tired. He had been poking around the system. Could he have made a mistake? Sally, you have to believe me. I have advertisers pulling out, Sally said, her voice rising. I don't need belief. I need a platform that works. This is Spectra Charles. My name is on the door. If this fails, I fail. And our capital is burning by the minute. Audra interjected softly. We've lost 12% of the projected user base in the last hour. The forums are already calling it Spectra's Titanic. She watched the color drain from Sally's face. The wedge was driven. Now, all Audra had to do was hammer it in. By the following afternoon, the atmosphere at Spectra Charles had shifted from panic to a grim, silent hostility. The technical issues had been patched. Audra had quietly reversed her sabotage once the damage was sufficient, but the reputational hit was catastrophic. Billy sat in his office, staring at the cancellation emails. He looked defeated, a rare look for a man who usually thrived on the fight. When the door opened, he didn't look up, expecting Sally to come in for another round of recriminations. It was Audra. She closed the door softly behind her. Rough day, she said, taking the seat opposite him. That's an understatement. Billy rubbed his temples. Sally won't even look at me. She thinks I torpedoed her big moment. Can you blame her? Audra asked. She's fought so hard to be taken seriously. To have the launch collapse because of oversight, it confirms her worst fear. Which is that you're chaos. Billy, Audra said. She didn't say it unkindly. She said it like a sad fact. You bring the Abbott drama, the gambling with high stakes, the unpredictability. Sally needs stability. She needs Spectra Charles to be a fortress, and you just blew a hole in the wall. Billy looked up, his blue eyes cold. You're enjoying this. I'm trying to save this company, Audra countered smoothly. I'm the cuckoo. If this ship goes down, I drown too. But I'm realistic. Sally is brilliant, but she's emotional. She's letting her feelings for you cloud her judgment. And now that the business is suffering, she's realizing it. I didn't change those protocols, Audra. Audra stood up, smoothing her skirt. The logs say otherwise. And in business, perception is reality. Right now, the perception is that you're a liability. She left him there, stewing in the doubt she had manufactured. Audra found Sally in the break room, staring blankly into a cup of cold coffee. The fiery redhead looked diminished. Her shoulders slumped. I just got off the phone with the bank, Sally said without looking up. They're concerned about the negative press. They want to review our credit line. Audra sighed, pouring herself a water. I managed to calm down the rep from Glissade, but they're wary. They're asking who is actually in charge of technical operations. I had to cover for Billy. Of course. You shouldn't have to cover for him, Sally muttered, crushing the paper cup in her hand. He promised me. He looked me in the eye and said we were partners. That he wouldn't let me down. He loves you, Sally, Audra said, sitting next to her. I don't doubt that. But Billy, he has a pattern. He gets manic about an idea. He rushes. He takes shortcuts. It's who he is. And maybe, just maybe, he subconsciously sabotaged this. Sally looked at her, shocked. Why would he do that? Because as long as Spectra Charles is struggling, you need him, Audra whispered, planting the seed deep. If you're successful, independent, powerful, maybe he thinks you won't need Billy Abbott anymore. He lost Chancellor. He doesn't want to lose you. It was a lie, twisted and cruel, but it found purchase in Sally's insecurity. She remembered Billy's desperation at the dinner, his need to win her back. Would he wreck her company just to play the hero, to keep her tethered to him in the mess? I can't believe he would be that selfish, Sally said, but her voice wavered. I hope not, Audra said, reaching out to squeeze Sally's hand. But we have to protect the company. We have to protect your name. Maybe it's time we rethink the division of labor. Maybe Billy needs to step back from operations until we stabilize this. Sally pulled her hand away, standing up. She walked to the window, looking out at the rain. If he steps back, it's over us. The partnership. Everything. Better the partnership ends than the company, Audra said. You worked too hard to get here, Sally. Don't let an Abbott drag you down to the bottom again. The confrontation happened an hour later in the main boardroom. The glass walls offered no privacy. so the entire staff saw the body language, even if they couldn't hear the words. Sally stood at the head of the table, her posture rigid. Billy stood opposite her, his hands on his hips, defensive and angry. Audra sat between them, the silent adjudicator, looking mournful but inwardly thrilled. "I'm not stepping down, Sally," Billy said, his voice tight. "This is a knee-jerk reaction. We fixed the glitch. The numbers are stabilizing. The trust isn't." Sally shot back. "I can't run a company wondering if my coup is going to crash the system because he couldn't sleep at 2 a.m. The investors are spooked. Billy, I am spooked." "It wasn't me," Billy shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "I don't know how my login was used, but I didn't do it. Why do you trust a computer log more than you trust me?" "Because the log doesn't have a history of blowing up his life," Sally yelled, the words tearing out of her before she could stop them. Silence descended on the room. Heavy, final. Billy flinched as if he'd been slapped. He looked at Sally, really looked at her, and saw the fear behind the anger. He saw the history of her father, the disappointments, the men who had promised her the world and handed her ashes. "Okay," Billy said quietly, "if that's what you think of me, if that's really where we are." He looked at Audra. She met his gaze with wide, innocent eyes. "I'll take a leave of absence," Billy said, "until the investigation into the glitch is done. But Sally, you're making a mistake. You're listening to the wrong voices." He grabbed his jacket and walked out. He didn't look back. Sally watched him go, her chest heaving. She felt like she had just cut off a limb to save the body, but the pain was blinding. She sank into the chair, burying her face in her hands. Audra waited a beat, then another, then she stood up and walked over to Sally, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing," Audra soothed. "It was hard, but you did it. You put Spectra Charles first. That's what a CEO does." Sally looked up, her eyes wet. "It feels terrible. Success often does at first," Audra said. "But we'll fix this. I'll take over the technical oversight personally. We'll rebuild the client trust. We'll make this company untouchable." "Thank you, Audra," Sally whispered. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Audra smiled, a genuine, dazzling smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You'll never have to find out. We're a team, Sally. Just you and me." There in the executive suite of Spectra, Charles' media was so cold it could have cracked the glass walls overlooking Genoa City. It wasn't a temperature issue, the climate control was humming along perfectly, but rather the glacial atmosphere radiating from Audra Charles's desk. Sally Spectra stood by the window, her arms crossed over a vibrant emerald blazer that screamed confidence, even if she didn't entirely feel it. She stared at the tablet in her hand, scrolling through the latest restructuring memo Audra had circulated just 20 minutes ago. "You're moving the design team to their necks?" Sally asked, turning to face her co-CEO. Her voice was steady, but the muscle in her jaw jumped. "Audra, that building is 3 blocks away. I need them here. We're in the middle of the fall launch." Audra didn't look up from her laptop. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, a rhythmic clatter that sounded like tiny hail. "It's a necessary optimization, Sally. We need the square footage here for the new ad sales division. Revenue drives the company. Design as well. Design can happen anywhere. Inspiration strikes in the strangest places, doesn't it?" Sally walked over to the desk, placing her hands flat on the polished mahogany. "This isn't about optimization. You're isolating me. You're putting my entire creative support system in a different zip code, so I'm left here alone with your sales sharks. It's going to bottleneck every decision I make." Audra finally looked up, her expression a mask of cool, feigned innocence. She adjusted her glasses, a faint, patronizing smile playing on her lips. "You're being paranoid. I'm making executive decisions to maximize our profit margins. Isn't that what we agreed on, or are you letting your personal volatility cloud your business judgment again?" The dig was subtle, but it landed. Sally stiffened. She knew exactly what Audra was doing. It was a slow, methodical suffocation. First, it was the budget cuts to her department. Then, the exclusion from the vendor meetings in Milan. Now, physically removing her team. Audra was building a kingdom where Sally was nothing more than a figurehead, a name on the door with no power to turn the handle. "I'm not the one making this personal," Sally said quietly, "but if you move my team, you're declaring war." "Then buy a helmet," "Darling," Audra replied, her voice dripping with honeyed venom, "because the movers are coming tomorrow at 8. Billy Abbott stood in the doorway of the Crimson Lights patio, watching the interaction through the glass facade of the building across the street. He wasn't there by accident. He'd been tracking the shifts at Spectra Charles for weeks, noticing the subtle tremors in Sally's voice whenever they spoke, the way she looked exhausted and cornered. He took a sip of his black coffee, the bitterness matching the taste in his mouth. He knew Audra Charles. He knew her ambition was a hungry thing that ate everything in its path. But this felt different. This wasn't just ambition, it was a surgical dismantling. Earlier that morning, he'd run into Seth, one of the graphic designers Sally trusted implicitly. Seth had let slip that he'd been reassigned to a basement office in the annex, effectively cutting off his direct line to Sally. Billy had connected the dots instantly. Audra wasn't just competing, she was systematically stripping Sally of her armor, leaving her exposed and vulnerable to failure. It was retaliation. It was petty, vindictive, and entirely focused on breaking Sally's spirit. Audra knew that if Sally failed at this company, the one thing she had built from the ashes of her past mistakes, it would destroy her. Billy crushed the empty paper cup in his hand. He had promised himself he would give Sally space, that he would let her navigate her own battles. But looking at her now, through the window of that high-rise, seeing the slump of her shoulders as she walked away from Audra's desk, he realized that space was just another word for abandonment. He couldn't watch her drown. Not when he knew exactly who was holding her head under the water. "Not today, Audra," Billy muttered to himself. He tossed the cup into the trash and adjusted his suit jacket. The casual, carefree Billy Abbott was gone. In his place was the man who had gone to war for his family, the man who played high-stakes poker with his life. He was going all in. The elevator ride up to the Spectra Charles offices felt agonizingly slow. When the doors finally slid open, the tension in the bullpen was palpable. Employees were whispering in huddles, eyes darting toward the glass-walled executive office where Audra sat like a queen on a throne. Billy didn't stop at the reception desk. He didn't ask for permission. He strode through the double doors with a momentum that made heads turn and conversations die instantly. Sally was at her own desk, her head in her hands, reviewing the eviction notices for her team. She looked up, startled, as the heavy glass door swung open. "Billy," she asked, confusion washing over her features, "what are you doing here? We didn't have a meeting." Billy didn't answer her immediately. His eyes were locked on Audra, who had risen from her chair, her face tightening with displeasure. "This is a private office, Billy," Audra said, her voice sharp. "You can't just barge in here. We're in the middle of a workday." "I'm not here for a chat, Audra," Billy said, his voice booming enough to carry through the open door and into the silent bullpen outside. "I'm here to tell you that the game is over." Audra laughed, a short, incredulous sound. "Excuse me, what game? I have no idea what you're talking about." Billy walked past Sally, positioning himself directly between her and Audra. It was a physical barrier, a shield. He placed his hands on his hips, his posture dominating the room. "I'm talking about the relocation of the design team," Billy said, his voice steady and hard. "I'm talking about the vendor meetings you forgot to invite Sally to. I'm talking about the budget freezes on her specific projects. You're not running a company, Audra. You're running a smear campaign." Sally stood up, her eyes wide. "Billy, wait." "No, Sally," Billy cut in, glancing back at her with a look of fierce protectiveness. "You've been trying to play nice. You've been trying to be the professional, but you're dealing with someone who doesn't play by the rules. She's not trying to help this company succeed. She's trying to make you fail." He turned back to Audra, stepping closer until he was looming over her desk. "You think no one notices? You think because you rapid and corporate speak about synergy and optimization that we don't see the knife in your hand? You are deliberately isolating Sally because you're threatened by her. You're scared that if she actually gets to shine, everyone will realize she's the visionary and you're just the accountant." Audra's face flushed a deep, angry crimson. She slammed her hand down on the desk. "How dare you? You have no right to come into my company and speak to me like that." "Security, call them," Billy challenged, not backing down an inch. "Let's have this conversation in front of everyone. Let's tell the whole floor why you're moving the creative heart of this company to a basement 3 blocks away." Is it for profit, or is it because you can't stand the sight of Sally winning? The silence outside the office was deafening. Every employee was listening. The facade of Audra's professional justification was cracking under the weight of Billy's accusation. "You're pathetic, Audra," Billy spat, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "Using people's livelihoods as pawns in your little vendetta. It stops now. If you continue to sabotage Sally, if you make one more move to undermine her position here, I will make it my personal mission to expose every dirty trick you've pulled, and you know I have the resources to do it." Audra was shaking. It wasn't fear, it was pure, unadulterated rage. She had been humiliated. In her own office, in front of her subordinates, Billy Abbott had stripped her naked, revealing the petty jealousy beneath her power suit. She opened her mouth to retort, to fire back with a stinging insult, but the words died in her throat. There was a truth in his eyes that she couldn't refute. "Get out," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Get out of my office." Billy held her gaze for a long, agonizing moment, letting the threat hang in the air. Then, he turned his back on her, dismissing her completely. He looked at Sally. She was staring at him as if seeing him for the first time. Her eyes were shimmering with tears, her lips parted in shock. For weeks, she had felt like she was fighting a ghost, gaslight into believing she was the problem. Billy had just turned on the lights and handed her a sword. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, the anger vanishing from his face as he looked at her. Sally nodded slowly, unable to find her voice. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and touched his arm. It was a small gesture, but in the charged atmosphere of the room, it felt like a lightning strike. "Thank you," she mouthed. Billy covered her hand with his own, squeezing it reassuringly. "I'm not going to let her hurt you, Sally. Never again." He turned and walked out of the office, the sea of employees parting for him as he passed. He didn't look back at Audra, who was now sinking into her chair, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of her desk. Later that evening, the lights of Genoa City twinkled below the balcony of the athletic club. Sally sat at a small table, a glass of wine untouched in front of her. Billy sat across from her, the adrenaline of the afternoon having faded into a warm, steady comfort. "I shouldn't have let it get that far," Sally said, breaking the silence. She traced the rim of her glass. "I thought I could handle her. I thought if I just worked harder, proved my value, she would back off." "Bullies don't back off when you work hard, Sally," Billy said gently. "They back off when you punch them in the nose. Metaphorically speaking, of course." Sally looked up at him, a genuine smile breaking through her exhaustion. "You were incredible today. I've never seen anyone shut Audra Charles down like that." She